Hello, I am Peyton Brindle, and I wrote my research paper on ocean acidification and the effects that it has on organisms in the ocean. The main reason I chose to research this topic was because at the time I was learning about it in my environmental science class. I found the effects of this to be very interesting, and I wanted to know more about what happened to corals and other animals that lived in the acidic waters. I also found this to be a very important topic that is underrated by people. This topic really sparked my interest when I discovered that nobody pays much attention or even really cares about the effects of ocean acidification. My hypothesis for this research paper was, if carbon emissions are not cut down, then the ocean acidification will continue to rise and harm marine organisms due to the ocean absorbing excess carbon dioxide from the air. The target audience for my research paper are other environmental science students. The group would most likely be interested in my findings due to the fact that we studied it and found it an extremely underrated environmental problem. This particular audience was picked to discuss and explain research that goes into farther depth than what was typically studied in class. Environmental science students have already learned about this topic, and once they start reading the research paper, they should recall some of the information that is discussed, which would make them more interested to hear about what was expanded on and what went into more depth. I hope that my audience gets a lot out of the information that I present to them. This could be a life-changing effect for many marine organisms and plants. I would like to think that people would stop producing as much carbon emissions as they currently do. There is a multitude of ways that this can be successful. One of the best known ways to cut down on pollution is carpooling. I know that this does not seem like much, however, it can reduce carbon emissions a great deal and help minimize the effect of carbon released into the atmosphere, which is later absorbed into the ocean. Another way to reduce carbon and other pollutants from car emissions is to make sure that an exhaust has a catalytic converter and that it's properly installed. This helps to catch and reduce the emissions that come from car exhaust. Deforestation also causes carbon emissions. Deforestation counts as 20% of carbon emissions that are released into the atmosphere. And if we reduce the amount of trees that are cut down, we will be able to reduce the amount of carbon we are releasing that is later being absorbed into the ocean. Once again, my hypothesis for this research paper was, if carbon emissions are not cut down, then ocean acidification will continue to rise and harm marine organisms due to the ocean absorbing excess carbon dioxide from the air. One of these sources that I have used comes from Tatiana Schlossberg, who is a writer for the New York Times. She writes about how corals are absorbing the acidic ocean waters, which is leading problems in juvenile corals. She mentions how the acidification is harming and destroying the corals in the subtropics, which is a place with very acidic water. This information comes from a trustworthy and credible source because it was edited and published and pulls from scientific documents that were written on the subject. Another source that I have used comes from the Economic Intelligence Unit Incorporated. This is a trustworthy and credible source because they are a research and analysis newspaper that publish articles written by researchers and articles written about research itself, which is not necessarily written by the researcher. This source says that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere causes global warming, but it is also absorbed into the oceans and causing water to change. It explains how the gas turns into acid when it is dissolved in the water, which harms organisms as the water becomes more acidic. This source also says that shelled organisms are weaker and thinner than they were decades ago, proving that the ocean acidification has played a role in this. My third source is coming from Space Daily, which is run out of United Press International. This source is trustworthy and credible because United Press International runs top stories around the world and are very popular. Many people trust and listen to what the source says, as it has provided accurate information time and time again. The source is talking about one organism by itself, but it can relate to other organisms that also relate to the makeup of the snail. This article is talking about how a snail no longer feels the need to run away and hide from predators around it, yet it can still sense the predator is there, but feels no need to run away. This leaves the snail for dead as has no desire to find an escape route. The first source is coming from Richard Spinrad and Ian Boyd, both who write for the New York Times. This information comes from a trustworthy and credible source because it was edited and published and also pulls from specific documents that were written on the subject. Spinrad and Boyd constantly bring attention that carbon dioxide is eroding calcium carbonate shells that most organisms use to create their shells. This is causing organisms to have thinner shells and not even be able to make shells. In the long run, this is causing them not to be able to live in the ocean where they are, or they will disintegrate and no longer exist. My last source is coming from Karen Weintraub, who writes from the New York Times as well. This information is trustworthy and credible because it was edited and published, but also pulls from scientific research that she writes about in her article. Karen talks about how corals are affected by algae blooms in the ocean in the acidic waters. Because the algae attacks and poisons corals and fish, the acidic waters are indirectly harming marine organisms in the area. If this were to continue, organisms would continue to be sick from the algae, and it could even lead to death. The amount of research that still needs to be done on this topic will never come to an end. The reason for this is because there are so many organisms in the ocean and so many ways that they can be affected by the changing pH levels, which many of them are left unknown. This is a general idea of what can happen to marine organisms. However, we still want to see what can benefit, what is adapting, what has died off or left the area because of rising levels of acidity. My hypothesis seems to have a great amount of support, and there are not many organisms that are left benefiting from the acidic waters, which is leading to migration or extinction of species. Questions that I still have about this topic is what is going to happen in the long run. Will the ocean reach its max absorption amount of carbon emissions just like the atmosphere is? What are the long-term problems for marine organisms in the more acidic parts of the ocean? Will it eventually become so acidic that humans cannot even get in the water? Will it become so bad that humans can no longer eat seafood? And how much of the food chain or a food web are going to be destroyed because of animals moving or dying? The conclusions that I expect to come out of this topic is for people to understand that this is a larger issue than what it's made out to be. Ocean acidification is dangerous and creates holes in the environment and ecosystems. I hope that people can understand the seriousness of what is happening and can feel compelled to solve or slow down the problem that is at hand. Ocean acidification is a major problem, and it's something that needs to be fixed.